Recording at this point for purposes and the sake of argument, it is 11:27 a.m. 5491. We will take the date and time off.
On the bottom.
Okay.
Recording. Okay. Okay, you're on. Want to start out by identifying yourself?
I'm Glenn Dennis.
You live where, Glenn?
In Roswell, New Mexico.
And the date is
I have no idea what it is.
May 4, 1991.
May 4, 19.
Can we get an age from you?
I'm 66 years old.
Okay. How did you first become involved in this?
The way I first became involved, I got a call. I was employed at the time at the Ballard Funeral Home in Roswell, New Mexico.
As a what?
I'm sorry?
As a what?
As a mortician. And we had the contract for the base at the Roswell Army Airfield. We had the contract for all of the mortuary services. And I got a call about around 1:15 or somewhere right after lunch, around 1:15 or 1:30, from the mortuary officer wanting to know what was the smallest size hermetically sealed casket that we had in stock or that we could get. And I think I informed him that we usually kept a 4 foot, but I could possibly get a 3/6. And I said, I mean, what do you have in mind? He said, well, this would be for future services later on in case he said, we need to know this in case something comes up in the future. And then he said...
Do you recall his name?
No, I don't recall his name. I had at the time, and Stan Friedman and I went over to check the records, but I couldn't find the name, and I don't remember the name. But anyway, I told him, he said, well, how long would it take you to get if we needed more than one? Because we always just kept a 4 foot in stock. And I said, if you'd call me by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I can have it in here by 7 the next morning because they come from Amarillo, Texas. And he said, okay, we'll talk to you later.
Glenn, had you gotten requests like that before?
No, not necessarily. Usually, you know, people not, until they really have a need for it, you don't ever have a call for it. But there's very few. At that time, pre-need services weren't too popular at that time. And then about another hour, maybe 45 minutes later, I get a call from the same officer. And he said, I would like to know what your preparations for bodies that might have been laying out in the elements, or he said, could you give me what's your preparation and how you would do it? And then before I could explain our procedure, he said, what we're interested in, and this would probably be for future use too, he said, would your procedure, what you would have to do to the bodies that's been exposed to the elements and everything, what would your procedures do to changing the, like the chemical compounds, the tissues, the blood and all that, what would that do? Would that destroy any of it? And so when I explained to him the procedure that we would go through, and like aspirating the lungs and the cavities and everything, that definitely you would be getting body fluids, and our chemicals at that time mainly were strong solutions of formaldehyde. And what we would do on bodies of that type that had been laying out for several days, what we called vatum, we have a metal line, you know, box metal line that we put the body in and make a solution of formaldehyde and water. It's almost straight formaldehyde, and they would say in like 19 to 24 hours. And I informed them that definitely that would alter a lot of the composition, and you would lose a lot of, you know, of the effect of the blood and all that. And so then we discussed on making the removal. How would you make a removal? Because if a body had been laying out, like let's say in our country here in the summer in July, you know, the temperatures can be anywhere from 100 to 110, 15 degrees. body lays out there for, let's say, 3 days. You go to pick up the body, the tissue and everything's going to come right off in your hands, you know. So it's not a procedure that you can just go pick up.
Did he,
So I explained that, yes.
did he give you any idea how long the bodies might have been out?
No, and I told him, I said, now listen, I said, whatever you have, I said, I don't know, you know, evidently you have a problem. I said, we have the contract, so I said, I'd be glad to come out and see what you have, and then we could work with you. And then I could tell you, know, how we would do it. And he said, no, this is for future use. He said, we don't really need your service today, but this is a, you know, future use. And I kind of had a suspicion that there was something, because you usually don't get, you know, people not wanting this type of information from you. So then when I talked to him, I said, is there a problem? If you have a problem, I thought maybe what we used to call, did you have a hot one, that was like if you had a VIP or something like that, that they didn't want to make any announcements or anything, but also they needed to determine the cause of death. And I said, what you better do, you better, if you have a pathologist, which we didn't in Roswell at the time, you better call your pathologist and ask him, and he'll know what you have, and you better ask him what you should do, and then you better follow his procedure, because otherwise, you know, you could do a lot of damage to the cause of death. And I said, what we would probably do if it was something like that, if we had to take it to Albuquerque, we would probably put it in a pouch and then try to freeze it immediately possible with dry ice. And I said, that's probably what we would do. He said, okay. He said he appreciated it, and that was it. Then let's say probably another hour, 15 minutes. I get a call. We had the only ambulance service, and I got a call on an emergency. There was an airman that was injured in a minor accident. He had a laceration in the forehead and in the nose. I think he had a fractured nose. And I took him to the base, but I didn't put him on a stretcher. He just sat up in the front seat with me. I gave him first aid, and then we just drove out to the hospital infirmary. And where I usually park the ambulance, there was 3 field ambulances, old Army ambulances there, and 2 of them, there was an MP standing right there at the back of those field ambulances. And I really never thought too much about it, because usually there's an ambulance, you know, something back there most of the time anyway. But when I was taking the airman in, when we walked up on the ramp, I noticed the back doors of the 2 ambulances, that the old field ambulances, were open, and I saw it looked like a wreckage, some type of, you know, they might have had a plane crash or something, and I saw some wreckage in there. But what I saw, it looked kind of like the bottom of a canoe. It was kind of in a shape, but it looked, you know, it reminded me, but it wasn't, let's say, over 2 feet, between 2 and maybe possibly the most of the pieces wouldn't be over 3 feet at most.
Now, when you say the bottom of the canoe, did it include the curved?
Well, yes,
end?
it was part of a curve, like maybe the head of the front of the canoe, maybe just, but it was you know, it was this shape, but it was kind of just on a slight curve. But like I say, there was kind of small pieces. And
How long did
well,
these objects
they
look?
couldn't have been. They were very small pieces. I wouldn't say that they were. They couldn't, I don't think, been over maybe 3 feet at the most. But anyway, there were some pieces there, and both of those kind of pieces like that, some pretty good size, you know. But really never thought too much about it, because when we go out on those crashes and clean up crashes, a lot of times in the field ambulances and even in ours, a lot of times we would get a call and be there on the site before they would. And when we've made removals of bodies or parts of it, you know, there would be a lot of dismembered part of the bodies, and some of it would be embedded into the crash, you know, into the parts of the plane, and we used to, you know, bring parts of it in, and then we would take them in when we would start identification, and that's when we would remove different parts of the anatomy from the crashes.
What did it appear to be made of?
Well, what it looked like to me, it looked like I don't know if you've ever, if you take stainless steel and like put a torch to it, you can see how the blue, you'll get a blue or purplish tinge off it, and it kind of looked like that.
An even color?
Well, not particularly. It was kind of mottled.
Did it exhibit gradations in color? Was it a
The
different
only
color
thing,
at one part of the
well, it was
the
the only,
purplish stain? Was it lighter or darker? Or?
well, yeah, it looked like, it might have been in a hot flame. Some of it might look more like stainless steel, but most of it was kind of bluish purplish tinge that I saw. But the only difference is on this outer edge on the curve there that it looked like that there might have been some inscription, something which I kind of thought reminded me of some Egyptian symbols or something like that. But just, it was, I was walking past, and I really never thought about this until I got back to the funeral home.
How large were the symbols?
Well, I wouldn't say they were probably over 3 inches high at the most. Squares, but it wasn't, as I say, there wasn't large parts, but I could definitely see that and differentiate.
Did you'd seen records before, as you described?
Lots of it, yeah.
Did this? What similarities did this have to the other wreckage? Did other wreckage have that purplish effect you described?
Not unless you'd had a lot of hot fire, but usually aluminum, and all that would just melt, and it wasn't like that at all. It was just like heated stainless steel, what it looked like, not like burnt aluminum or anything like that. I didn't see any char. It wasn't any black char marks or anything.
Any glass windows, that type of thing?
Anything other than this particular type of metal?
No, I can't say that I saw anything different.
The letters you described, did you see them because they were painted on, or because they were maybe depressed within the metal,
like
or were they raised, or?
Looked like they were stamped and raised, looked like you might have had a stamp that you could hit, and it didn't look like they were painted. It looked more or less.
Were they any color?
They were a little darker than the other, yes.
Any sign of seams on these things, rivets, screws, something that might fasten plates together?
I can't say that I did.
Okay, then what happened after you saw that?
Well, then I took the airman on in and checked him into the infirmary there and turned him over to whoever was on call, the nurse there. And I have to always, when I bring him in, I'd sign a report, about a funeral home ambulance, how transportation, and because I'd always have to file a statement later and send back out. And so after I checked him in, then there was a lounge on down the hall a little ways, and in the hot summer, and a lot of times when you go out on a call, you might be there for an hour or so, and because you'd have people on your stretchers, and your equipment would be tied up, and about 6 miles or so in, so we usually would wait, or if they were short of help, then we would help also take the patients off of our stretchers and get our splints and put them on x-rays and everything else. So sometimes you'd be out there for an hour, sometimes a couple of hours, trying to help them, but mainly you'd be wanting to get your equipment clear so you could take it on back in. So that's the way we got acquainted with a lot of the doctors and nurses and people like that. So anyway, I just went back, and it was hot, and I thought, I'd go to the lounge and have a Coke and whoever was on duty and talk. And there was one particular nurse that I was pretty well acquainted with, and I was going to want to see if she was there and buy her a Coke. And we usually talked a lot, but this nurse had only been there. She'd only been commissioned like around 3 months. She had graduated from college and taken the state boards and gotten her license, and then she went into the service and was a second lieutenant. And she had started out, she came from a very deeply religious family, Catholic, and had attended all the private preschools, Catholic schools, and on through high schools. She wanted to be a teacher, but her whole thing in life was that she wanted to be a sister and nun, and she wanted to dedicate her life to God, but also helping children. She wanted to be a teacher. But about 2 years into her first 2 years of college, she got this feeling. She kept saying she got this feeling from God that he was, some reason she always had a feeling that she should be a nurse. So she changed her major after the first 2 years, and then went into studying, went into the nursing training there.
And she'd given up the idea of becoming a nun?
No, that was her plans. But she wanted, what she told me, that what she really wanted to do, that, I mean, she could have stayed in the, she could have gone on in and still gone to school and everything, even though she was belonged to one of the orders. But she thought that she would better understand and everything if she went to the schools, public schools, and that it would help her in her teaching. And then later on, when she changed to nursing, that she thought that she could get closer to the people and maybe see their problems while she was young and then going through training and everything that she could if she went in an order, because she would have more time to do this. But she had nothing in mind other than ever being a nun.
How old was she then?
She was 23. I was 22 and she was 23.
Glenn, would you happen to remember at all where she might have graduated from?
Well, she was born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota, but I can't say that. I don't really know the names of the convents or the schools or whatever she was at. I don't really know. I don't know that we ever discussed the names of it other than this is what she did. And the reason that she went into the service, she said it was kind of a burden on her parents to keep her in college. And when she changed to nursing, then she had that opportunity to, they would pay for the education, then she would own some time afterwards. And then as soon as she got her time served, then she would definitely go into the order and dedicate the rest of her life to that. So, but anyway, as I started back to see her, before I got back to the lounge, there was some examining rooms on each side of the hall. And she came out of one of the examining rooms and coming across the hallway. And I noticed she had I don't know, it was a handkerchief, a piece of gauze wad over her mouth. And then she saw me and she said, what are you doing here and how did you get in here? She said, my gosh, get out of here as soon as possible. She said, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And I said, what the devil's going on? And she said, just get out of here. And then she disappeared, and that was it. And about that time, when I got there right beside the door that she went in, there was a captain standing there. And he said, who are you? And I told him I was Glenn Dennis from the funeral home, that I brought a patient out. And he said, you wait here just a minute. And he waved at someone, and then about that time, 2 MPs showed up. And where I got in trouble was I said to him, I said, looks like you had a crash. And I said, I need to go back and get preparations ready, because we usually, in the crash, we always did our identification, everything in our garages and everything. Getting the dog tags and the buddies and everything else. So I said, should I go get ready? And he said, that's when he said, you wait right here. And then 2 MPs come on and said, come on, mister, you're leaving. And,
what do you remember about him?
well, I don't remember anything about him, but the 2 MPs was taking me down the hall. They were, on each side of me, and they told me they had orders to follow me back to the funeral home. But we had gotten just not probably over 10, 15 feet, and then we heard this voice said, we're not through with that SOB. He said, bring him back. So I turned around, went back, and then there was this other captain, red-headed captain. He was a mean-looking number, but he was talking pretty rough. And said, you did not see anything. There was no crash here. You don't go into town and making any rumors that you saw anything that there was any crashes. And he said you could get in a lot of trouble. Well, I was a little agitated, a little mad about the situation when he called me an SOB to start with. And I said, hey, look, mister, I said, I'm a civilian and you can't do a damn thing to me. And he said, oh, yes, we can, mister. He said, somebody would be picking your bones out of the sand. He said, we can do anything to you, you know, that we want to. And then there was a sergeant, a colored sergeant, that had a pad or something in his hand. I remembered that. And he said, he'll make real good dog food. He said he would make good dog food for our dogs. And they said, get the SOB out. And that's when I went on out and went back to the funeral.
What did you think? You know, this is a novel experience. What did you think was going on?
I had no idea. I knew there was something, but at the time I didn't have any idea what was going on. Then they did follow me all the way back to the funeral.
Glenn, if I could backtrack one instant, between the time that you saw the canoes, so-called canoes, and the time that the two MPs more or less escorted you out, and did anything else occur during that time period that might have gotten you suspicious? Did anything else unusual occur? Was there unusual activity? Were people running back and forth?
Well, it was unusual because I usually had a pretty free, I could go in the hospital and do whatever I wanted to. I knew a lot of the people. I never had any problem before, you'd say hi, Captain, and all this, because we weren't out there every day. Sometimes we'd go for a week or two and never be there, and sometimes we'd go out maybe 2-3 times a day, depends on what happened to the airmen.
Were there any unfamiliar faces?
Well, yeah, I didn't know any of these people.
High-ranking people? Any of them?
I think that captain was probably the highest ranking one. But they were not familiar people that I'd been working with, yes.
You detect any unusual smells?
Not at that time, no. I didn't. Then the next day, I tried to call this nurse. I wanted to call her, see what was going on, because then, when someone escorts you back, which had never happened before, you knew there was something wrong. It wasn't normal procedure, you knew that. So I tried to get a hold of her, and they kept telling me that she wasn't there yet. She wasn't there, and so I called maybe 3 or 4 times that morning. And about 11 o'clock, she called the funeral home and said, I understand you've been trying to get a hold of me. And she said, I'm not on duty today. But she said, I need to talk to you. And I said, fine, you want me to come to base? She said, well, let's just meet at the officers club. Because at the funeral home, we had an associate membership at the officers club. And we could go out there and use it, and have the same facilities and everything, go eat whatever we wanted to there. We just had a associate member, more or less like a country club associate membership. So we made this date, what time we would meet, and then I went out there and I met her. She was very upset, and she looked like, death warmed over. But she said, you won't believe what happened. And she said, before I talk to you, before I tell you anything, excuse me, I'm having a throat problem here, but she said, you have to give me a sacred oath that you will not ever mention my name or not. She said, you can get me in a lot of trouble. She said, what I'm going to tell you, you don't know where you got this, And I said, what do you mean by sacred oath? And she said, I mean like cutting your arm off. That's what she told me. And I said, okay, because I said, I would definitely like to know what's going on.
Do you think she was telling you this because you were good friends?
Oh, I think so, and I think she didn't want to get in trouble either, because she was very conscientious of everything. I mean, if the rules and regulations, that was just like reading her Bible to her, you followed the rules and regulations.
Yet she told you.
But she didn't have to say anything.
Yeah, and that probably was against the rules, wasn't it, telling you?
Well, I'm sure. I would assume that she wouldn't have told me that unless someone, said you keep this to yourself or whatever. I'm assuming this now. because, but anyway, she said, what happened, and the way she got involved in the first place, she was going across the room to this other room to pick up some supplies. This is where the two doctors that were in there supposedly doing a preliminary autopsy on these bodies. And she got whatever she went. She started out, and these doctors said, "You're not going anywhere, nurse. We have to have you in here." So we have to have some help. And she said she never smelled anything so horrible in her life when she got in there. And I said it was the most gruesome, most horrible sight that she had ever seen in her life. The smell was almost devastating. She said, "I was never so horrified in my life." And she said, "I don't know if I'll ever sleep again or anything else." She said, "I've never seen anything so gruesome." I said, "Well, look, you're a nurse." And I said, "Anytime you're in this business, you're going to see a lot of things." And I said, "You may as well get used to it." And she said, "No, this isn't what it is." She said, "This is something that no one's ever seen."
Was she ordinarily calm or emotional?
Oh no, she was so hysterical. She would
No,
grab.
I mean ordinarily.
Yeah, oh yeah, she was very, not laid back, but very precise though. But but I mean, she would grab her head and shake her head and cover her eyes and everything else. And
What were you thinking at this point?
well, I didn't know because I mean, I was thinking that she was going in total shock. I really thought, hey, there's a problem here, and I thought she would probably go into total shock's what I was really thinking.
And while she was telling this, other people were there, and
There wasn't anyone around us because we kind of had a table off on the side of the office club ourselves, and she was hoping that no one could hear us. In fact, there was some up maybe at the counter there, at the bar there. We were in the lounge, and we had ordered a sandwich. But she was never touched her sandwich, and I don't think I ever did either. I'm not sure, but she looked like she was going in just total shock, really. And I said, "My God, And she said, She said, "Last night I made a diagram." She said, "You won't believe this, but she said I made a diagram," and she said on these little bodies, and she gave me she drew me a diagram of an arm because she said the anatomy from the shoulder to here was real short, and this arm was longer here. And there was only 4 fingers there wasn't a thumb, only 4 fingers. Little long, very fragile little hands. And she said when one of the hands was detached from the arm, and she said when the doctors turned it over, that she noticed on, and they made a notation. That's what she was doing, was trying to take notes and making notations for them. And they were all sick. But she said that on the tips of these little fingers, it looked like little pads with little holes that kind of looked like a small suction cup on each end of these fingers here. Said there was no thumb at all on none of them. They only had like the 4 fingers on there. And she said the heads were very much larger than the body. It was out of proportion for the size of the body, the head. The eyes were very deeply set back and set in. And she said the amazing thing about the skulls that it wasn't like ours, that it was kind of like a newborn baby. They were kind of flexible, that the doctors couldn't move, that it wasn't like a hard skull. And she said that was a different. The nose was very concave. She said there was only like a couple of little orifices, and you didn't have the bridge of the nose, but it was more or less concave. The mouth was just a real fine little slit there. The doctor said there was no teeth, but it looked like maybe a heavy cartilage or something like that. It was very kind of hard then, but not like wasn't teeth or anything. The ears didn't have any. There wasn't an ear like ours, but there was a couple of little orifices in the ears up here on each side. Very small, but it looked like there was a couple of little flaps. She explained it, and she drew me a diagram of the head. She drew me a diagram of the arms and the hands, and it was on the back of a prescription pad, where the nurses always carried a prescription pad, and all taking notes and everything for the doctors and all that. These were rather small, but she had drawn those the night before, and she gave them to me. She said, you know, that you can have these, but there again, I was sworn to secrecy again, that, you know, either destroy them after I got through with them or whatever.
Anything about these beings, their necks?
She didn't say anything about the necks. She didn't say anything about the clothing. She said that they definitely had no hair at all. But then about that time, she said they all became so very ill, and when I saw her coming out, that's when she was so sick she thought she was going to vomit. You know.
What were they ill from?
Well, mainly from the odor, I think. She said it was the most god-awful smell that you've ever smelled in your life. Of course, being in the funeral business, I've smelled floaters and everything else. I mean, I've been through that experience, and I know what she was talking about.
Now, how many bodies were there?
She said there was 3 bodies. 2 of them were very mangled. She said it looked like some predator or something might have had been destroying portions of the bodies, because the tissue and some of it were cut in strings, like, you know, they were pulled. The doctors thought maybe this is what happened with that. But some of them, like she said, the hands and the arms were all dismembered from, because that could have happened from the removal. You don't know what happened. One, she said, was really pretty much all there, and this was the one that they were describing, you know. She said the body was well intact, that one was. She said they were like between 3.5 to 4 feet tall, so that would give you, but the bodies were black. Of course, you know, being exposed to the element could have caused that. Yeah.
How did she refer to them? What did she call them?
She didn't know what to call them. She just said small bodies, that best of my knowledge now. I don't think she ever called them anything except very small bodies.
She expressed any idea of what their origin was?
The doctor said the 2 doctors, and she didn't know whether they were pathologists or what, but she'd never seen them before either. And so she assumed they might be pathologists, but she wasn't sure.
No, I mean the bodies.
But she said
Oh, yeah.
the doctors, she said the doctor said, hey, this isn't anything we've ever seen before in our life, and there's no textbook that's ever covered this, you know.
Is there any indication of sex of these beings?
I asked her about that, and she said, I don't know. She said, I didn't look, and I don't think anybody else did either. She said that 2 of the bodies were probably so mangled, and that they probably couldn't have told it, you know, but she said, I don't know about the other one.
Did she say anything about legs, feet?
She didn't. She just, what she diagrammed and what she told me about the head and the arms and hands is really all that she really, and then she got real ill again while we were sitting there, and she said, I've got to get back to the barracks. She said, I just can't. She said, I don't think I can make it another step. So anyway, I drove her. We went to the Officer Club, and I drove her back to the barracks there, to the nurses' quarters. And that was the last time I ever saw her then. The next day I called out, started calling her the next day to just see mainly how she was. And they just said that, you know, she wasn't available, and called back later. I called all that day, and I never did get her. Then I called back the next day, and when I called the next day,
What would they say when you would call?
they just said she's not here, that she's not on duty today is what they really said. And the next day, I called, and I got one of the nurses that I was familiar with, but I can't remember her name either. I didn't remember her name. She said she's not here. She said she's been transferred out. And I said, really? She said, yeah. She said she and several of the other personnel have been transferred out. And she said, I don't know anything. I can't tell you more than that. That's all I know. So about maybe a week, maybe 10 days or let's say 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks, I'm not sure at the time, I got this letter. And all that was in the letter was that she said that this is my APO number. She said, we can, she says, I don't have time to write or anything right now, but she said, this is an APO number you can address a letter to. And she said, we will we will discuss this in a letter on what happened later on. Something, I mean, don't hold me word to word, but this was the gist of it. Very short, just a note. And said, but I am in London. And that was it. So I write a letter to her, and that was sent to, just to the Ballard Fuel Home in Roswell. So then I think the next day or something, I sat down and I wrote her a letter, and hoping that, you know, that she wasn't in any problem and having any problem. I was hoping that, you know, she got over the shock and everything, the trauma that she'd been through. And about 2 weeks, I'd say it was at least 2 weeks or more, the letter that I had sent come back and said return to sender. And then on the corner down in red letters it said deceased. That was it, and it was my letter that was sent back to the funeral home there. And that was
Stamped on the letter,
yeah, it was
deceased, or
stamped.
handwritten?
It was stamped deceased. It was in a red block form that said deceased.
Now, did you ask anybody at the base?
Oh yeah, then, well, I guess, you know, 2 or 3 weeks went by, but I didn't go out. Like I said, we didn't go every day, but every time I'd go out, I'd say, did you hear from the lieutenant? Finally, one of the ladies said, well, the rumor is, she said, this is strictly a rumor, and I can't confirm anything else, but the rumor is that she and 5 other nurses were on a training mission, and they went down and they were all killed in a plane crash. And she said, that's all I know, and that's all I can tell you. So then I never did hear any more, but I kept asking, did you ever, you know, every once in a while I'd go out and I'd say, did anybody ever heard, you know, any more about the crash or anything? And no one had ever heard anything. That was the last I ever heard, and that was it.
But you never got any official word?
Oh, no, no. So, that was pretty much my involvement on this.
Glenn, the next time you had occasion to go out to the base, was everything normal?
Pretty much
Did they
so.
treat you normal even?
Pretty much so, but there were some new faces around, yes. But,
What-
but everything was pretty normal.
Were there some old faces missing?
Oh, yeah, some. But another thing, going back to when the doctors, she and the doctors became very ill, and she said that they didn't finish the autopsies or anything right there, that they couldn't take it any longer. And they had the old air conditioner, you know, and the smell was so bad that they were afraid this was going to go through the ducts and they would, you know, go through the rest of the hospital into the other room. So she said they came in and they made a removal and they took the bodies to one of the hangars to finish the work over there.
But she didn't go with them?
Oh, no, no, she didn't do it.
Were there any other nurses assisting?
No, she was only one.
How many doctors were normally on the base staff?
Well,
Do you think?
I don't really know how many is on the staff, but, you know, when you go out there, there was always a doctor or nurse that was on call on all the shifts. But you had a lot of orderlies back in those days. You'd have corporals and everybody doing all the bedpan work, you know, and the cleaning and all that sort of business.
Did they ever make that order for the caskets?
No, never did. Never heard any more about it.
Did you hear anything at all from the military about keeping quiet?
No, just the time that I was threatened there in the hall by this captain and this sergeant, the only time that I was ever.
So there was no follow-up?
No, oh, and then another thing, I'd forgotten, the next day when the sheriff and my father, Sheriff Wilcox, were very close friends, and my father was, he was kind of an old gunsmith. He was a finished carpenter is what he was, but he would make special stocks for different people in town, you know, that would, you know, and their guns and all their
Right.
rifles and all that. He and the sheriff were pretty good. They used to play dominoes once in a while on Saturday evening or something. And the sheriff went to my folks' house the next morning
Next morning after what?
after I was threatened, you know.
Mhm.
And he went to the house and he wanted to talk to my father, and he said, I don't know what kind of trouble Glenn's in out at the base, but he said evidently he's a problem. But he said, I've come out to tell him, to tell you, that you tell your son that whatever he does, that he didn't know anything, he didn't see anything that happened at the base. And he said, George said, I don't know what the problem is, but he said, they want they want you and your wife's name, and they want all your children's name and addresses. And my father, he said, well, till I know why, he said, I don't think it's any of the damn business, whatever it is, but he said, my son, he said, we've raised our children that, they were to do right. He said, I can't believe that Glenn had gotten in any trouble, so he drove immediately to the funeral home. And he came in and he said, son, what kind of trouble are you in out at the base? And I said, I'm not in any trouble. And he said, he said, I can't help you if you don't tell me the truth. And I said, Dad, I'm not in any trouble. I said, I know I'm not. He said, well, he said, George Wilcox told me that you might be in some trouble. So I knew that he wasn't going to leave me alone until I told him. And this is the only man that I've ever told this story to until I told Stan Friedman one day. When I told him what the problem was, that I'd been threatened, and he became very upset. And, he thought, well, he might just go get his gun and settle some. He was very upset about it because, now if I'd have done anything, I would have paid the price with him before anything else, because that's the way we were raised, But he became very upset. But he's the only man I ever told, and I told him to don't ever repeat this to anyone either. Not that I was particularly afraid,
What was his reaction when you told him?
Well, he was just very upset, very mad. He was mad.
No, I don't mean about you being told to shut up. Did you tell him the full story?
I told him, yeah, pretty much just what I told you. And he said, oh, hell, he said, maybe you shouldn't tell the story. Something. He said, I don't know. He said, I don't know what to do about this. And I said, well, just keep your mouth shut, I guess. That's what they want me to do. But it really didn't bother me. I was upset and mad because I didn't like them going in there and calling me name. Now, if they would said, hey, this is some emergency, a national security or whatever, because, back in those days, everybody's patriotism was high back in the 40s, in the second after the war. And if they were, but God to threaten you and everything else, it was a little different ballgame, And I just told them go to hell, and I guess I was too stupid to really be scared. I wasn't really afraid they were going to do it. It never entered my mind they were going to do anything, but how do you know, I think a lot of other people would threaten also. So.
Glenn, what did you think when perhaps that day or the next day or whenever the article came out in the newspaper about the Army Air Force picking up the wreckage of so-called flying disc? You connected those in your mind, or
well,
did you think? What did you think?
Well, then I figured then that what the lieutenant, the bodies that she worked on, had to be. And actually, there was quite a bit of talk around town for a few days after that. A lot of people didn't believe it. A lot of them thought it was scientific experiments from different, the Army, the Air Force, or somebody had, or whatever. A lot of people didn't take it really serious. A lot of them did.
You would just keep mum when somebody talked to you about it.
No one ever talked to me. Even Walter and I've been friends. I've known a lot of these people, Wilcox and all those, and I see, back in those days we didn't have corners. We didn't have a corner per se, but we had corners inquest. When we would have homicides or suicides or fatalities or whatever, and most of the time I was I would be, a witness or what. Embalming the bodies and working on them, I'd have to go testify to the cause of death and all this. And so I was with the sheriff a lot, and we never discussed this. Even the deputies never discussed it. No one ever discussed it. Walter and I have known Fred, been social friends for years, and none of us until 2 years ago. But I never said anything. It wasn't that I was trying to hide anything. No one ever taught me. And after I saw how Walter and everybody's getting involved, I said, I don't know whether I want to get involved or not. But my wife is the one that talked me into it. She said, I think you ought to at least get your story on the record. She said it may not mean anything, but at least get it in record, and then tell everybody to leave you alone and go on your way. But she said, I think you should do that. And that's the only reason that I did, was just because she thought maybe I should, because I didn't know if it was important or what. But anyway, Stan Friedman had been after me, and Bob Shirky brought Stan up that day, you know, in case the dog, go ahead and get it to him and then get it out of the way and forget about it.
Well, now, looking back to that time in 1947, what do you think was going on?
Well, you know, certainly none of us had ever heard of UFO or aliens or anything else. The only thing we heard anything even close to that was a Orson Welles radio program, you know, back time. And that, but as far as, I never thought anything about it, you know. I was out at the base a lot and around the military, and my brother was a fighter pilot and all this during the war. I was there during the war because I was 4F. I only had 1 ear. That's why I'm having to sit sideways to you to understand you. But I never ever thought anything about it. Really, after that, I've never thought too much about it. I don't think any of us ever thought too much about it.
How do you feel now about the military's behavior and the whole thing?
Well, my mind was made up when they threatened me that day that, okay, I think, you know, so what are you trying to cover up? Tell us the truth and we'll either keep our mouth shut and go on our way or forget about it. But you don't like to be called names, you don't like to be threatened. I mean, that's only human nature, you know, none of us like to be threatened. So I was upset about it, yeah, and I was real mad about it. At the time I got over it. Then I was really concerned when I never heard from the lieutenant again. I still think to this day that this is strictly what I think now. Knowing her and everything, knowing that she wanted to go back in, she wanted to join the order, she wanted to be, you know, to help. Mainly she wanted to be in children's, to help the young children and all this. I think they probably discharged her and put her in the convent somewhere. I think that's where she's been all these years. I'm just thinking it. I don't think she was ever killed. I don't think so.
Glenn, the drawings, could you talk about them, where they might be today? I've heard that you looked for them.
Well, Stan and I had a file. I'm a nut on filing everything. And I had a personal file, but also had a file at the funeral home. I kept a file in the history of all the suicides, of everything that I was involved in. I always kept a record myself because I was the one at the funeral home that would always have to go to the inquest and everything. And then you always had insurance companies, you always had families that would come back and maybe 2 or 3 years later. And I always made it even, I was so precise that I even wrote what kind of clothes and everybody, because you'd get letters, you know, 3 or 4 years later, my husband or my son that was killed there on a certain date had on a certain jacket and all that. What did you do with it and all that? So I had real good records. When Stan was there, and when I left the funeral home, the reason I left because I bought a funeral home myself. Kay and I bought a funeral home, and I went into business for myself. And I didn't go after I didn't think to get my records because there's a lot of the records that I wanted, you know, and that I would like. That was personal that I would like. And I even had the letter in there from her that I kept those deals. And but when Stan and I, we found the old, and I had it down in the basement, we found the old filing cabinet, and we found it, but what had happened, all of those old military files, I even had all the records for the ambulances. I mean, we had ambulances, everything was separated. And I could go back and tell you when we took to the hospital and the time and everything else. All those records were destroyed. They just took the whole thing out of the files to make room for, and they just took them out to the city dump and threw them away.
Were any of your files still
All
there?
my files were in there.
Were any of your files still there?
No.
They were all
Stan
gone.
and I, we found it, just like I explained to him, the filing cabinet. One of the boys that I'd hired before, when I was managing the funeral home that I'd hired, he remembered carrying my records out, and he told Stan, he said, well, I remember Glenn's records, but I didn't think they were, you know, worth anything. He said, I personally carried them up, you know, and took them out.
And that's probably where the drawings were.
Yeah. I made a drawing, I think, Don, I don't know, maybe you guys have seen it, I don't know, but I made a drawing, the best of my knowledge, of what she gave me, you know, and that was the best that I could remember and the best I could do, and I did make that drawing, what she gave me. But
This officer who had you removed, did you ever see him again?
No. Never did see him again.
Any clue as to where he might have come from?
The only thing that I've ever heard about it was Stan Friedman called me. One time Stan called me and he was very excited. He said that, excuse me, that he had just interviewed someone, some young boy, kid or somebody that was hypnotized. And he explained the red-headed officer and also the black sergeant. And he called me, he was so excited about it, and he said I always told Stan it was the meanest looking eyes that I'd ever seen on a man, and he said this kid explained the same thing to him. And he was real excited. Well, thank you very much. But I never did see any of them after that. But anyway, that's the way I was involved in this.
When did you leave the Ballard Funeral Home?
Well, it was about, I think it was in the early 60s.
And what was your position at the time?
I was manager. Mr. Ballard was still there, but he was the mayor, and he was involved in local politics and everything else. And so I pretty well managed everything. You know, I never really had a title as manager. I just automatically did everything, made all the decisions, did all the ordering. It wasn't, you know, Roswell was small. We just didn't have funerals every day and everything. It was,
Did you still have the base contract?
yeah, we had the base contract all the time I was there.
Did you get the base contract then when you opened your own?
No, I didn't have it. You know, but you know, they closed the base. I don't remember what year they closed it, but they closed the base. But we just automatically got it. Politics, that's what, when you're the mayor and everything, but close it. That's politics for you.
It hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Okay, you think of anything else? Ask? Yeah,
We've
go ahead.
covered everything.
Any contact with the lieutenant's parents? Did you have parents?
I never had any I had contact one time that I was out there and she introduced me to her brother. She said, I want you to meet my brother Bill, and he was a sergeant, but I don't think he was in the Air Force. I think he was in the Army or something.
Would they have any knowledge other than yours or of her disappearance or?
Well, see, I've never contacted any of them after that. I never heard from anyone after that. He was just like her. He wanted to serve his country, but he was also studying to be a priest, and he wanted to, after the service, he wanted to go in back and be a priest. It was a very devout family. I mean, they were really something else.
Glenn, were the MPs on the base and the guards running around with rifles and unholstered weapons?
Well, they always had a pistol, you know, on their
They didn't have them
belt.
drawn, or
No,
did
no,
they?
no.
Was there any sign of increased security?
Well, the only thing I noticed was standing back of those ambulances, and I don't know if they were supposed to be guarding them or what, but certainly I'd never seen any MPs before, and certainly there was never any MPs escorted us back to the funeral home, you know. So, but I really never noticed any, at the time that I was involved in it, I just told you the MPs that was involved with, and that's all that I can say that I ever saw.
How long were you in the building?
Oh, I couldn't have been there. They didn't let me stay in there very long. I probably wasn't in there over 15 minutes.
Wow.
I'm just guessing something like 15, 20 minutes at the most.
And until this officer spotted you, nobody gave you a hard time?
No, because, you know, she was upset because I was there and how I got in. That was unusual, you know. She was hysterical then, you know. How did you get in here? You know, get out as soon as you're gonna get in a lot of trouble. So, but it wasn't a normal day in the base hospital, I can tell you that. It wasn't anything normal. Because we were never threatened. We pretty well had to run in the base, you know. So, no one ever stopped us. We were out there in the ambulance. We were there. We buried all the dependents, you know, the military dependents and babies and everything else, stillborns. We were involved out there quite well, you know.
Quite intimately.
So we didn't ever have any problems. No one ever questioned us when we were out there about what we were doing. We worked with the chaplains real well.
It would seem that you were accorded a great deal of respect then by the military for the job you were doing.
Yeah, and the MPs, see,
They appreciated what you were
when
doing.
we would go out on back in those days, every time you'd go out on an emergency, the MPs and the police, before we ever left funeral, we called the police station, so we have an emergency at whatever address we were going to. They would dispatch a car there, and they would always meet us there. At that time, an MP would always ride with when we had the military base, it would always be, most of the time the MPs would ride with one of the policemen. You got an MP, military police along with the others, and they were most out there. And we worked real good with them, and they were all pretty good guys. In fact, there's several of those MPs today that they're retired from the police force and fire department in Roswell. You know, the state in Roswell, married Roswell girls. Quite a few. But we had a real good relation with the base. That was the only time we've ever had any problem. That was the only time.
One day, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that covers it then. Certainly appreciate you taking your time, and we'll see what comes of this.